Story 1. Late night phone call. I stayed late one night in the summer at this office job I had. We got paid by the hour, so it was worth my while. I was filling out a report when the phone rang. That was odd. Nobody ever called at this time, expecting someone to be there. But I picked it up. "Hello?" I asked hesitantly. There was a lot of noise on the other end, and it didn't help that the air conditioner in my boss's office was super loud, even from the other room. "Hello?" I said again. I couldn't tell if someone was talking or not. There was some sort of muttering that I could hear above the noise on the phone, but it could have been a car radio or something like that. "Hello?" One more time I asked, impatient. The muttering continued. It was kind of intriguing, but creepy, and after paying careful attention I started to recognize patterns in some syllables, but I still couldn't make out what the words were. The air conditioner in my boss's office shut off. Finally, it was easy to hear. Wait, it was also easier to hear from the other end of the phone. "Won't be long now. Just a little more. Just a little more. Not much longer now. Hold on there," the voice said. I realized that I could hear the voice not just through the phone, but through the air, and I whirled around looking for its source. Standing in my boss's office was a naked man, staring at me, a big grin on his face. His eyes were wide. "That's it. Just a little more. Just a little more now," he kept repeating over and over. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I had a surge of adrenaline. I burst up out of my chair and bolted down to security to tell them what was going on. Shortly after, the man was apprehended. He was a homeless man who had snuck into our building somehow. Nobody was sure quite how, so it all worked out in the end. But in that moment when I turned around and saw him, that was one of the most terrifying moments of my life. Story 2. Carbon monoxide. It was my first week on a new job, and I still was getting to know people. It was a corporate job, kinda stressful, and I was getting hired just as a lot of people were getting laid off, so the atmosphere was tense. I worked in a cubicle in a sea of cubicles. I remembered that morning starting out pretty normal. I was beginning to adjust, and my sleep had returned to normal, which is why I found it odd that I was so tired that day. At least, around noon, I started to become tired. It was hard to keep my eyes open, in fact. I had a meeting in the boardroom at noon, and I was extremely nervous for this, especially seeing as I was falling asleep. But for some reason, even my nervousness wasn't waking me up. Mentally, I was becoming more drowsy, and as I got up with my folder and walked towards the boardroom, I noticed I wasn't the only one experiencing something strange. A man in front of me, heading into the boardroom, keeled over and began vomiting right in the doorway. Another man collapsed and started to convulse on the floor. It was now that I realized something must be in the air. All of my senses were starting to fail me, and I dropped to my hands and knees. I had to fight to stay conscious as I crawled on all fours towards the door. And then when I could no longer stay on my knees, I army crawled. I made it to the stairwell and sort of threw myself down them. And from there, I made it outside before passing out. Turns out, one of the recent layoffs had a bit of an aggressive streak, and had carbon monoxide poisoned the office. 7 people were killed and 2 are in a coma as of writing. I was one of the lucky ones who realized what was going on before it was too late. Story 3. The Shadow. I worked at a call center for a charity one fall, trying to drum up recruits for a door-to-door campaign. We were in sort of half-cubicle things, and mine was facing the parking lot. I hadn't had much luck with my calls so far that night, but I kept trying, as that was what I was getting paid to do. My boss was a pretty understanding woman, and since we were a charity, we didn't have to be as aggressive as those more commercial call centers. I gazed across the dark parking lot, lit only by a few street lights at the far end, and stared off into space in that general direction while doing my calls. On one fall night in particular, I noticed something strange. There was a shadow moving across the far side of the parking lot, but under the streetlight I couldn't see anybody. At first, it was walking from right to left across my field of view, but then it walked back and stopped just under the streetlight. Again, I traced it from head to foot with my eyes, but couldn't see anything where the feet were. Most of my attention was focused on the phone, however, and I wasn't freaking out at this apparently supernatural phenomenon. At least, that was the case until suddenly it started to elongate, as though either the street light were lowering or it was growing taller. Its height then began to fluctuate rapidly between its shorter form and its elongated form. This is around the time when I stopped even hearing what was being said on the other end of the phone. The shadow raised its arm and began pointing in my general direction, although of course it didn't have eyes and I couldn't tell if it was seeing me. It continued to fluctuate in height, and now it appeared that the source was walking towards me. As the base of the feet came further to me in the parking lot, the shadow flipped once it got up to the building, such that the head was now further away from me than the feet. Slowly, a smile appeared on its face, made of light, gaps in the shadow. It was a very creepy smile, and its extended arm now beckoned to me. I hung up the phone and stood up. Some of my coworkers did the same. I wasn't the only one seeing it. I didn't know what to do. It didn't really make sense to run. Or did it, seeing as we didn't know what it was? The shadow suddenly expanded, engulfing the entire parking lot in shade. It lost its human shape and the power went out, including the street lamps. It was pitch black for 5 seconds everywhere, and then the power slowly turned back on. I continued working there for another couple months, but never saw anything like that again. Story 4. Paper cut. I had an entry-level sales job where something weird happened. I got seriously injured on the job, in a way that didn't really even seem possible, and it actually shook me up for a long time. It happened this way. I was reaching over to grab a pen from this cup of pens that I had at the edge of my desk, and as I did so, a piece of paper caught my wrist and nicked it. Nothing too bad. Stung, obviously. A paper cut. And despite its annoyance, I did what anyone would do with a paper cut. Nothing. Just tried to ignore it. Didn't think much of it. At lunch, I reached into my backpack to grab a sandwich, and the tines on the zipper path of my backpack caught the cut and tore it wider. Really freaked me out. It felt bad enough to have your skin sliced through, but to have it pulled apart while already open was a whole other type of disturbing. This cut was now bleeding a lot more too. I really shouldn't ignore it. I went to the bathroom and got it cleaned up as best as I could, put some polysporin on, and got a band-aid on it. However, the band-aid went on a bit wet, and within an hour it was sort of falling off, so I just pulled it off. The bleeding had stopped anyway after lunch. I had a bunch of typing to do in the afternoon, and my arms stayed put while I did that for over an hour. I thought I'd get up to grab some water, and when I did, there was an excruciating pain in my wrist. Somehow, I had been bleeding, and the blood had congealed, sticking my skin to my desk. When I stood, I pulled my arm away, and my skin went with it. A 6-inch gash now divided my wrist in two, and blood was hemorrhaging out of it. I went into shock, and an ambulance was called. I really was losing a lot of blood. It was as though my wrist had been slit. People gasped, and my boss rushed over along with the HR person. They made me hold my arm up high and put pressure on the wound. The ambulance arrived, and I had to get a blood transfusion, as well as 12 stitches in my arm, but I survived. I don't know if that was being extremely unlucky or some sort of dark force that caused that sequence of events, but when I think about it, it really does disturb me. Thanks for listening, guys. If you enjoyed this video, tune in next Thursday for a brand new video. And join me every Sunday at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Nightmare Theater, an open book club for nightmares. You can send your nightmares to theforgottengrove@gmail.com, and I'd love to read them on stream. Until next time, embrace the beautiful dark.